which are already starting and showing that they're aging. So I think the demographic advantage that we have is going to be huge. And from an investor's point of view, if you look at trends in the past, investable capitals always move from aging economies into younger economies where growth rates are always much higher. So I think that that in itself also is a huge advantage that India will have going forward in the next decade or so. The huge demographic dividend that will derive onto us, also because of, like I said, increasing levels of education that Indians are becoming more and more aware of. So I think India is a great story as a global powerhouse in the making. I think that if we continue to grow at 7-8% in the next 2 to 3 decades, I'm sure in the span of all of our lifetimes, India has to become one of the superpowers of the world. And well, I think you can't, like I said, you can't want to be a global company or want to be a part of a global growth story and ignore India. And I think it's pretty much China and India. I think this whole debate about China versus India is quite, in many ways, flawed, because I think, in my view, very clearly, you have to be invested both in China and in India, because these are the two economies that clearly show the maximum growth potential and are in fact today the most sought after harbors for investment.
It's interesting to see this, that while we think that the world will come and invest in India, Indian companies are now evaluating their own financial profile in terms of global dimensions. And for example, I think in case of Tata's, who presented earlier, 75% of the turnover now comes from global businesses. I think even in our case now, with the acquisition of Novelis, more than 50% of our turnover comes from this. So you see this as a hedging philosophy versus, because you want to be a big player, you need to hedge yourself and therefore also be globally. Because one thing that I would like to ask you at this point of time, and that will give me, that will give the next question also, is there is this fear that the world is going towards egalitarianism. The bust up of capitalism, the mess up that capitalism caused, has turned the society in some manner more socialistic. And therefore, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, in an article, and he spoke earlier, he talked about that most business managers today don't remember Datta Samant, that how they feared unions and so on. And you're seeing this trend in Delhi, for example. Suddenly this seems very new to lots of people, because a whole generation of people did not see this. So how do you balance the two?
So to take the second part of the question first, I think this whole question of socialism or quasi-socialism and egalitarianism, I think that's going to be very important going forward. I completely agree with you. I think that going forward, the most important societal institutions or institution, if I can club them all together, is going to be the corporate world after the government. So I think the onus on corporates to give back to society, to contribute to society, will be much more going forward than it has ever been in the past. I think after the experience of the last 1 year, that sort of demand from corporates would get accentuated even further. I think that if you're talking about, for example, sustainability today and the environment, you'll have many such issues that corporates will be called upon to contribute towards, both issues that are directly related to corporates, also those that extend beyond the strict boundaries of corporate life. So I think that socialism, egalitarianism is something that perhaps will see, we will see an emergence of that, and I think that to an extent has also been called upon because of excesses by corporate entities more in the western part of the world.
What concerns you have on the social front, on the political front? And example, you talked about egalitarianism and you talked about nationalism. We have seen some of the sectors, and I would like to specify, where you've seen the regulatory or the decision making create huge difficulties. So do you worry about these things, or you see generally good socio-political environment ahead for this India story to come? Because we must remember that while India looks very good from where we are, we're still a very small part of the world. And if some accident occurred, the world can just forget us. The world takes no time to change direction.
I think that the role of the government comes into focus on an issue like this. I think that the role of the government, let's say, in providing infrastructure for an economy that is becoming more global. If you look at other countries which have become much more globalized, the support of the government in the initial stages of globalization and the spirit of partnership that existed, perhaps much more of that is required for us in this stage of our globalization process. I think the fact that we are bursting at the seams as far as infrastructure is concerned. I can't afford for my goods to be at the port for 10 days because there's congestion in the port, or I can't afford to invest 20% of my project cost on power and bridges and ports when my competitor somewhere in the world doesn't need to do that. That's not really creating a level playing field. So I think the government's role on infrastructure, like has been said over and over again, cannot be emphasized enough. And beyond that, I think that the sheer entrepreneurship of Indian businessmen makes up for all the rest of that. So I think that the support of the government in being an infrastructure provider and in being a provider to an extent of social infrastructure, be it healthcare and education, I think the government can play the role of a catalyst there, though there is huge scope there also for private sector intervention and investment. So I think that all of these put together, it's a very complex society, as we know. Our country is an amalgamation of many countries. I think that the one thing that I'd like to say is that there are waves of what I call social entrepreneurism that I see happening, which is young people who want to start enterprises that meet a societal need, but want to do it for profit, not go around asking for charity. They're trying to either reduce the distance between the not so privileged sections of society and the more affluent sections of society, or they're trying to create self-sustaining jobs for the less privileged in terms of the differently abled people in society. So I think there's a whole new generation of social entrepreneurs that I see emerging, and I think that the kind of fabric that we have, the social context that we have as a country, I think there's a huge playing field for social entrepreneurs and a huge need for them to be given the kind of infrastructure that they deserve and given the kind of recognition in terms of attitude towards the work that they're doing.
Yes, and so I think, there are calls that people take that while what the government needs to do gets stated almost every day in different fora, and people take a call on that, how far is this going to go, and we won't get into that. I think your actions speak about it. It's been not a long journey in terms of, there's not a lifetime achievement award that we're talking about. It's been 15 years, but it's been very, very eventful, 15 or 20 years in business. And so in this journey, there have been many special moments. So would you like to recall any lucky moments, any moments that you regret, any moments that you make you particularly feel proud?
I think that whenever growth has been a driving force, whenever there's growth, there is energy and there's a sense of positivity. So whenever there's been a huge growth spurt, either because of an acquisition or growing inorganically, I think those are times that one feels a great sense of elation.